on, I would say, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, literally wave us, send a note, because I feel like we're talking into the abyss right now.
Yes, no one can hear us from space.
Definitely says live. Anyway, if you are here, I am very excited because we have got 3 drams this evening, and we'll let you into the run of show. So obviously every month for Pour and Sip, we share 5 drams with you. We choose them because we like them, we think they're really cool. It's either because they're brand new or they're old favourites. This first dram falls into that latter category. It's one of my all-time favourite whiskies. I'm so excited to share with you. We're kicking off with,
Same here. It's absolutely one of my all-time favourites. When I saw it in the box, I was like, yes.
It's amazing. So we're kicking off with Compass Box Hedonism. So line that one up first. Then we've got our special guest for the night. James is going to come and join us to talk about Yamazaki, so Japanese whiskey, which is awesome. I love Japanese whiskey. It's such a heritage, such a story there. So it's going to be amazing to speak with him. And then Andy, you're in charge of the last dram.
Yes, we're going to be talking the Benromach, the Contrast series, and the Peat Smoke edition, which is a really interesting whiskey as well. And definitely due to it being peated and quite heavily peated, we're saving this one till last to not kind of spoil your palates before the kind of more elegant and luscious, let's say, the Compass Box, for example. We are definitely live now, by the way. So hello, everybody. Sorry if you our chin wag beforehand.
Exactly. I really would have hoped that the gremlins had gone on their summer holiday, all of this stuff, but there we go. Oops, there's loads of background noise coming from where I am. That's gone quiet now. Fantastic. So I also, just going to give people a couple of minutes to catch up because I'm not sure if we're live or if there's a bit of a delay. Andy, have you been watching the Olympics?
I have not been watching that much of the Olympics, I have to say, Christy. I was all sported out after the Euros. So I really have been bad, and it was also quite a bad time, I think, for me. Like, as in late in the evening. I've got a baby now, so I need to go to bed early.
I would have thought, Andy, given that you've got a small baby and you're a musician, that you would be practically nocturnal when the Tokyo Games would have been right up your street.
That's exactly. Are you watching it?
I am obsessed with it. I cannot get enough of it. But I'm not staying up late. I'm catching up. And I also feel like there's space here for, like, you know, celebrating Japan, celebrating Tokyo. So I feel like it's timely that we've got the Yamazaki up for our second dram.
Yes, absolutely. Who apparently did an amazing job as well with hosting it as well.
Yes, indeed. So I feel without further ado, we should crack on. Remember, if you're watching, please get involved, share your tasting notes, share your comments. Let us know if you're into the games. If you've been watching something, let us know what you reckon. Apparently we're not live on Facebook.
Yes,
that's disappointing.
Yes.
Head on over to YouTube. If this is coming through to you late, then head on over to YouTube. I'm just gonna suggest we put a note out to send everyone over to YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to crack on with the whiskey. I feel like I need a dram after these technical issues.
I was about to say, we've had a 3-week break, guys. Let's go easy on us, these technical questions. But yes, we're still here. And if you're with us on YouTube, please welcome. And let's get into these whiskies.
Let's do it. So, hedonism. Right, let me pour this dram while I tell you a little bit about it. So, independent bottlers, we love celebrating the independent bottler here at Pour and Sip. We try and have some in a few boxes. We've had some boutique whiskies, we've had other ones. And for me, independent bottlers, or blenders in this case, really bring such a creative edge to whiskey. This is absolutely no shade on distillers right here. They are very, very cool and very excellent. But I feel like where you've normally got a distillery character that you've got to adhere to, or, you know, you're stuck with playing within single malt rules, perhaps, for example. If you're an independent player, you can kind of do whatever you want and be completely led by creativity and your passions. This, for me, is what we have right here in the glass, Exhibit A, Compass Box Hedonism. Now, if you've been watching Pour and Sip for a while, you will know that I have a fondness for grain whiskey. We'll get into it in due course because it is very, very different.
So much so that me and Christy usually do ask each other which dram we'd like to present before we go live. And I have to say, in this case, I didn't even ask Christy because I just knew that she would want to take this one. Exactly.
I love it so much. And I know it's like choosing between favourite children, but there we go. There we are. So Compass Box, founded, I think it was like the turn of the millennium, 2000. So a little of a way back now. And one of the real big players in this creative space, if you have a look at Compass Box Bottlings, check it out in the Pour and Sip member store. These labels are stunning. The designs are gorgeous and the whiskies live up to how it looks. And here we are with what is actually a blended grain. So going to give you a quick lowdown on categories in Scotch whisky. We've obviously got single malts, which you know and love. And we've got blends, which is a mix of that single malt and then also blended whiskey. What is blended whiskey? Blended whiskey is a mix of single malt and grain. We sometimes see some single grains. We've certainly had single grains in the Pour and Sip box. You might know names like Girvan or Cambus, things like this. In the same way that a blended malt, so something like Monkey Shoulder, is a mix of single malts from more than one distillery, a blended grain is a blend of grains from more than one distillery. And you hardly ever see them in whiskey. They're super rare, really unusual, and it's an absolute treat to have this to share with you guys. Now, something else that's really special about this that I really, really love, it's from 3 distilleries. So Cameron Bridge, so you may have heard of a dram or two called Hay Club. That's from Cameron Bridge, but Cameron Bridge has also made some really long-aged, absolutely stunning, beautiful whiskies. We have, yeah, I think we have a boutique whiskey Cameron Bridge, I believe.
I think it was a 30-year-old as well.
Yes.
I think that's another great thing about grain whiskies. You get to try older stuff for much less value, like price. You don't have to pay as much for the older and get to try 30-year-old whiskies for kind of, let's say, nowhere near as much as you pay for a single malt.
Exactly. Value for money is absolutely incredible. So we've got some Cameron Bridge in here, which we love. Delicious stuff. We've also got stuff from a closed distillery. So there are a handful of distilleries in Scotland that, you know, in the past, Scotch wasn't as loved as it is today. They've fallen out of fashion. They've been closed. Cambus is one of those. So doesn't exist anymore. There's liquid in here in this blend that there's no more of it being made. It's super rare. And the same for Port Dundas as well. So of the 3 distilleries in this blend, 2 of them are closed, right? This is like really incredible stuff. Not only is it really rare liquid, it's been blended, in my view, really expertly. And I'm so excited about it and I can't wait to taste it. Andy, are you a fan of single grain? Am I on my own here or are you a fan as well?
I absolutely am. And I have to say, you mentioned it. I mean, this is one of my favorites. And actually, I think this may even be the one that got me in to kinds of grain whiskey. And I mean, it's just so luxurious and hedonistic even. That it's got this wonderful creamy notes, like kind of vanilla, like ice cream note that I get from grain whiskey. And I know you mentioned about the Hay Club, but often my friend, you know, if someone's, you know, not so versed in whiskey might buy a bottle of Hay Club and they like it because it's got that sweeter, creamier kinds of style. I always say hedonism is the one to go for after if you're looking for something a bit more complex, a lot more complex, you know, and I think this is literally the whiskey. I think if you are going for a grain whiskey, for me, this is the one to recommend as a starting point.
I agree. And I feel like it's such a summery whiskey as well. And we've got some of your tasting notes coming through already, which I absolutely love. Simon says, this smells amazing. I agree. Shout out to Simon. Ian Jambo Rain, one of our faves. Lots of vanilla on the nose. Getting some mango maybe also. I feel like tropical fruit vibes are strong with this one. L. Sutton Vanilla Cream. Yes. Steve Common Williams. This smells wonderful. Apple, honey and custard. Yes, please. Simon, reminds me of Victoria sponge cake. Yes. Oh, this makes me want to go and do some baking.
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I can't bake for love nor money. But I have to say as well, the nose on this is, it's like a 10 out of 10 for me, the nose on this one. And it's as good as I remember. I finished my bottle recently from a while back. And it's just, the nose on this is just, I could literally sit here all day with my nose in this glass. It's that beautiful and decadent and rich. It's just wonderful.
It's gorgeous. And I'm glad to see we started on the food pairing early this week, just making me hungry.
Yeah.
We've got some more desiccated coconut from Gareth. I agree. I feel like coconut is something you get from bourbon casks a lot of the time. And this is a bourbon cask whiskey. So like, I like to liken nosing and tasting whiskey to being a bit like a detective. And we're definitely getting those vibes from this one. Is it Breezy? Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Scones with strawberry and cream, or even cream and strawberry, depending on where you're from. Let's not go down that road when you put your cream on or your jam on first with your scones. But I'm here for the tasting note. Lots more here. The cask clad, that's sad that the whiskey's no longer around. Yeah, well, you can still get them. It's just that they're no longer being made. So once they're gone, they're gone. So every single drop that you drink from a closed distillery is extra special in my book for that very reason.
Worries me about how much they've got left to keep producing hedonism. to be honest. But I think they do change. They're released in batches anyway, I think. So I think they do change sometimes the distilleries that they use within this batch, which also just goes to show how amazing the blenders are to be able to kind of blend, to this recipe and kind of get it from all sorts of different distilleries, and maybe have to deal with low stock from another kind of distillery for 1 year and kind of make the same product.
Indeed, indeed. I also want to flag, actually, you might be thinking, well, what is a single grain? We've talked about these different categories of Scotch, but what does it actually mean? While your tasting notes are still coming through, keep them coming. And also, if you've got any questions, right? So we've got James coming up as our guest. If you've got questions for him about Japanese whiskey in general, if you've got questions about the drams we're tasting, put them in the comments and we will get to you as quickly as we can. I'm aware we might be on a delay today, especially, but bear with us. We're doing it. We're working through the technical woes. So what is single grain? We're talking about two key differences here for me. One is the raw material and one is the type of still that you're distilling in. And both of these things have such an impact on flavour. I feel like all these notes we're getting on the nose, the lightness, the sort of aromatic vanilla, the kind of delicious coconut, the kind of citrusy bananas for me, like banana split, milk chocolate, all of these wonderful kind of like lighter notes. How do we get them in this whiskey? So starts with raw material. If we're going to compare with single malt, which we've got two coming up later, if you're a single malt Scotch, you have to be made from 100% malted barley. That gives you some kind of like heavier cereal notes, first of all. And thoroughly delicious. Absolutely not like, hating on malted barley at all. It's amazing. And they're incredible like single malts. I also love single malt, by the way. But with a single grain, you can use, kind of pretty much anything. You might have wheat in there. You might have corn in there. You're much freer to play around with your raw material recipe. But the fun does not stop there. Single malt, if you've been to a Scotch distillery, you probably would have seen what we call pot stills. They're kind of onion shaped, a bit like a kettle, batch production, double or triple distilled in Scotland, triple most of the time in Ireland. And there you get quite a pronounced spirit. With single grain, you're putting it typically through a column still. These are amazing bits of kit. A little bit more complicated. Basically, you've got lots of mini distillations going up and up and up. So you distill to a higher ABV. You've initially tend to have fewer of these flavour compounds. And when you stick it in a cask for a long time, that's where you got these wonderful notes of vanilla and coconut coming from. And to me, it's just amazing.
Yeah, I think as well, I said this before, like single malt, there is a little bit of snobbishness about malted, but single malts nowadays. And there was always the thing, because grain was often used in blended whiskies and stuff like that. So, but I think that's slowly changing as well nowadays, especially with stuff like this. I think people are much more interested in single grain whiskey at the moment. And also, don't forget, the single grain doesn't mean it just comes from one grain. It really means it comes from one distillery, rather than a blended grain in this case, which is from a few different distilleries.
Exactly. I want to shout out to Ian Thompson right now. I'm really jealous. Cameron Bridge is a distillery I really want to visit. My parents lived next door to Cameron Bridge Distillery for 18 years. I lived there from when I was 15 to 18. Fond memories of walking our dogs around the distillery boundary, especially at malting time. I mean, what amazing smells would have come from there.
Yes, that's absolutely amazing. Steve Coleman Williams, the taste is very light and easy. Lemon curd, fresh cracked peppercorns with a hint of coconut. We haven't even tried this yet, Chris.
We need to. I mean, I'm dangling this under my nose. I'm teasing myself. It's so unfair. Let's say cheers to the first whiskey of the night. Cheers, all.
Cheers, everybody.
Love that so much. So much.
Yeah, absolutely. The nose is so sweet and so kind of grainy, and the vanilla notes. It's like the nose for me is like a bounty bar. That's got the desiccated coconut with the milk chocolate. It's wonderful. But on the palate, there's a little hint of spice that's there. That's for me not present on the nose really much at all. And there's like these kind of tropical notes that someone else was mentioning towards the end. It's kind of maybe a hint of lime for me, maybe, or lemon or something like that. Some citrusy notes. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I'm still getting the lingering bounty bar in it. You kind of malted milk balls as well. Do you remember those? Those were really nice.
And someone, I can't see who it was, someone shouted out about those like milk bottle sweets.
Yes, absolutely.
Lots of confectionery notes in this as well, which for me is spot on. It's amazing. And again, Sean McCarrick, a few drops of water brings out the spices and prolongs the finish. If you're feeling, I mean, you don't have to add water to your whiskey. If you love it as it is, no need to at all. But if you're feeling experimental, pop a few drops in and see how it transforms it. There is never any shame adding water to your whiskey.
Absolutely. Steve Coleman Williams saying, Andy, they need to get pour and sip cures all snobbishness, as mentioned last month. That's exactly it, because with pour and sip, you try stuff. And that's the main thing. Sometimes snobbishness comes from having not tried. You go, well, I'm too elevated to drink this or drink that. So it's when you try something, oh, actually, that's really, really nice. So there's no snobbishness when it comes to kind of single grain whiskey. And Dan S saying this seems like great value at £54 with discount at the pour and sip store, if you are a member. So, I mean, it's yeah, I think it's great value as well. And Compass Box tends, in my opinion, to, you know, their quality is just, we had the juveniles as well, and we had Jill Boyd come and talk to us, and she's amazing. And I've tried I mean, Spice Tree is another incredible Compass Box whiskey, but for me, this is the absolute, my favorite Compass Box, the one that really, I just love this dram.
Yeah, I love buying it as a gift for people as well, because I feel like it's probably a whiskey that you may not have come across, but it's so delicious. I feel like it's a real crowd pleaser, and just because it's so popular, it doesn't detract.
Yeah, you just know that people are going to like it, and especially even non-whiskey drinkers are going to like. This is going to be the one that's going to make them go, well, actually, I did quite like Hague Club back in the day, but this is like on a whole nother level to that. It's just in complexity and stuff like that. So, you know, I definitely think it's definitely a good gift whiskey as well, especially considering how beautiful the packaging is and the labels are on the Compass Box stuff.
It's so good. Sean has just described this as dangerously quaffable. I really, really agree with that. And I want to like have a little shout out about the texture of this, because I feel like initially it's quite velvety, then you get little prickles of spice coming through, and then it just rounds off again with kind of chocolatey notes. I absolutely love it.
That's exactly what I was saying. It's like, so the nose is very, very sweet. I don't think it gives off on the nose much of the spiciness. You actually get that kind of like fresh cracked pepper that kind of comes on the end, maybe some hints of lime and lemon citrus zest, as I was saying. But then this lingering note you get, the finish goes on, and it is really, really milky for me. And really, really chocolatey and creamy, like vanilla ice cream kind of lingering in your mouth. And it is just wonderful.
Do you know what? The only thing that's letting us down with this dram is the weather. I feel like this is a thoroughly summery dram. Right now, we should be basking in sunshine, vanilla ice cream in one hand, hedonism in the other, sunning ourselves. What is going on?
Roger Ford asking, out of interest, I know it doesn't make it better or worse. Do you have any idea how old the three whiskies are? I think this one, there is no age statement on this at all.
Yeah, and you know what? This comes back to, I think we talked about this a little bit before, the transparency piece in whiskey. And I know there's a few players in Whiskey, Compass Box being one of them, Brookhardy being another one, where you really want to be able to disclose details about the component parts, but you're not allowed to. The only age statement you're allowed to put on a whiskey, whether or not it's, you know, a blended anything, is the youngest part of that. So if we knew, it's not allowed to be advertised, kind of a thing. And it's so frustrating.
Yes, it is. But I mean, in fairness to Compass Box, they're one of the most transparent out of any of the blending houses. And usually you would be able to get all that information online. And I know with if you're mentioning the three whiskies of tonight, actually none have an age statement. But I mean, the Benromach, it doesn't hold an age statement. We know how long it's been distilled for. So yeah, I think we'll get on to that.
Well, and just before we move on, we're going to get James on shortly to talk about all things Japanese whiskey. I just want to shout out Jeremy Anderson's tasting note, which I love. Smells like fairground sweets, candy floss, cinder toffee, and popcorn. I'm so here for that.
I so want to go to the fairground now. I love candy floss at the fairgrounds. It's making me all nostalgic. Mike Pizarro saying he likes the juvenile, but this is better in his opinion. Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I loved the juvenile as well, but this one for me is just it's a wonderful whiskey. Maybe they're quite different, but I think for me, I enjoy this one. Extremely.
I love this. Yes. I love it so much.
But it's,
my dramatic intake of breath was because Pesho has rightfully reminded us that I don't think anyway, that we've shared the recipe for the smoky cokey floaty. So we're talking about ice cream and whiskey again. We need to get that up on the socials ASAP. It has to happen.
That was with TJ, wasn't it? That was a good month ago. So wow, okay, we'll get that.
We're working on that for you. We're working on it. It's all good. Right. Shall we see? I mean, I don't want to put this whiskey down. The only thing that's making me bear to part with it is because we've got two more amazing drams still coming up. Let's see if James is here. We'll bring him on and we will go from Scotland over to Japan. Let us see if he is here. Hi, James. How are you doing?
Hello. Very well. How are you both?
Good. I mean, all the better that we are drinking fantastic whiskies, quite frankly.
This is making it better in this weather, I have to say, because it's horrendous here. So I think.
I definitely need a warm dram. I just cycled home and got absolutely soaked. So I'm ready for something tropical in my glass.
Okay.
Yes, and you are providing the goods right now, I think, with the Yamazaki right here. So that's the next dram up. So grab some water, go for a palate cleanse, and we'll crack on. And Andy, we'll see you in a bit.
Yes, see you later. Enjoy, guys. Take care.
Well, remember, there we go. He's off. Bye, Andy. Don't worry, he will be dramming along. He will be dramming along. So next up, so we've gone through the hedonism. Next up, we've got the Yamazaki. So fresh tasting glass, fresh dram. We're here. We're going for it. So while everyone's preparing themselves, James, tell us a bit about you. Who are you, and what have you got to do with Yamazaki?
So my name's James, as we've already established, and I'm the brand ambassador for Suntory in the UK. So my background's really in bartending. So I've spent 10 years or so, being really lucky in the venues that I worked in to always have a pretty good collection of Japanese whiskies. Got very, very fortunate that it was one of the first whiskies I tasted, actually, the Yamazaki 10-year-old back in probably like 2008 or something, and immediately fell in love. I was like, that's actually one that I can drink. So I was, young in my whiskey journey at the time. And since then, I've just collected them ever since and been very lucky to now work with probably my favorite of the Japanese whiskey brands.
I feel like this is a dream job scenario right now for somebody who is obsessed with Japanese whiskey like you are.
It's exactly that. I always said to people that I didn't want to be a brand ambassador because I always thought that there were no brands that I truly could represent. But Japanese whiskey has basically formed the kind of path of my career. And then when I got the phone call saying they wanted me to come in for an interview, I was like, you know what? There couldn't be anyone better for me to kind of tell people about.
Fantastic. So before we get stuck into the whiskey, I want to have a little chat about sort of Japanese whiskey, where it is right now, what's going on with it. Because when you was talking about 2008 and 10-year-old age statement Japanese whiskey, I feel like we were living in a different time back then and we didn't realize how good we had it. So what's changed? What's happened now?
So there was this really unfortunate period for the whole world of whiskey between the kind of 90s and noughties, where the whole industry of whiskey just kind of fell out of fashion with most drinkers. And as a consequence, it meant that lots of the kind of more unusual, less well-known distilleries were able to release really amazing whiskies and eventually get discovered. And Japan has had whiskey for nearly 100 years now, but it hadn't really been discovered in the West. And then around kind of the mid-noughties, slowly but surely, Suntory and various other Japanese whiskey producers started to win awards for the quality of their whiskey internationally. And in 2013, one whiskey in particular was noted as being the best whiskey in the world, and that was a Yamazaki whiskey. And suddenly there was this just absolute explosion where bars started to take interest, consumers started to take interest, and everyone realized how amazing this, century-old tradition or history or region of whiskey had to offer. And now we're in a time where, sadly, because things were so quiet for 20-30 years, the amount of whiskey being produced simply hasn't lived up to the demand that we're now experiencing over the last decade or so. So we do still have, all of our age statements still available pretty much. But due to demand, we've also increased new products like the Distiller's Reserve, which show a variety of different ages and styles from the Yamazaki distillery.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I always think about this kind of partly with like wonder and awe, because it just goes to show how great Japanese whiskey can be, but also kicking ourselves collectively because we only have ourselves to blame for this. We got onto a good thing and we went for it.
That's the lovely thing, I think, about the world of spirits. We're very open as a society to anything that tastes good. And, whilst these days there is a bit of a supply and demand challenge for a lot of Japanese whiskey producers, we're still able to get some amazing stuff.
Perfect. And the other thing I want to ask you about, again, before we crack on with whiskey, is highballs. So I feel like a lot of the time, particularly with single malts, we can be a bit like, oh, should I mix it? What should I do with it? What we talked earlier very briefly about adding water. I feel like highballs, pioneered in a way by Japanese and Japanese whiskies, so delicious, and totally throw that out that you can't mix whiskey.
Absolutely. It's such a funny thing how when you take two cultures that are so different, the idea of what whiskey can be can also divulge massively from one another. So what was amazing in Japan is that they had this tradition of mixing alcohol in general. So traditional spirits like shoshu and similar things would have been lengthened with water historically in Japan. So unsurprisingly, when these amazing Japanese whiskies started to be produced, people drank them in the same way. So we're here in Britain, Scotland, and the traditional whiskey regions, we've always said, you drink this as it comes. This is the way it's meant to be. In Japan, they drank it in the way that they enjoyed, and that was long in a light, refreshing style of serve. And that was just the way that their palate was kind of more accustomed to. And as a consequence, now we're experiencing a new way of drinking whiskey that's way more refreshing, way easier over an extended period of time, and frankly, just tastes delicious.
So delicious. I love a highball. And will I also say, when the weather isn't letting us down, another perfect summer day whiskey drink.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, summer day, but also on evenings like this. I remember when I was very lucky to live in Japan for a while, and it's the biggest drink out there. You could, you actually sell more highballs in Japan than beer. So everyone down at the local pub is just, big glass, lots of ice, double shot of whiskey, and loads of soda water. And it's just one of those things that you can enjoy of an average night with all your friends.
Absolutely sorted. Now, there is one more point of order I feel we need to address, but there are lots of nosing notes coming through already, and I'm very aware that, we need to get stuck in. But Malcolm has raised a really vital point, and I want to get your take on again. And then I really won't hold us back anymore. He's saying, I read an article on Master of Malt website that states Japanese distillers were buying Scotch in bulk and adding it to their output. Now, this is all tied into kind of a decision recently that a bunch of Japanese producers, including Suntory, I believe, are saying, we are going to almost introduce a new kind of, not kind of category, but a rule to say that this is all made in Japan versus this practice of some people buying in whiskey and calling it Japanese. Shed some light on this for us.
Fair enough. So it's a really challenging thing when you've got a new industry, and there's, whiskey in Japan is something relatively new. We've had whiskey in Scotland for 200-300 years. Japan, it's been around for about 100 years. Now, a lot of different producers have come up and gone down and come up again in the Japanese industry. And some of them have followed, as Suntory have, the traditional Scottish way of making whiskey. And they've opened their own distilleries. They've designed incredible spaces with wonderful pot stills and all the things that we would expect of a traditional distillery. And I'm proud to say that all of the Suntory products that you can get on Master of Malt and other places here in the UK, every single one of those is made in exactly the way that you would expect of a Scottish whiskey. And all of the Suntory products are made in Japan by Japanese distillers, aged in Japan, the whole hog. However, there are, of course, some other companies around Japan that have, found it really difficult to keep up with demand, but also just, have had to find ways to create, products that they can sell in the meantime before they're able to sell whiskey that they've distilled and aged themselves. So I can't speak for the entire industry. There have, of course, been some fairly famous controversies of brands around Japan that have brought whiskey in from Scotland and other parts of the world to blend into products. But I can proudly, really happily say that Suntory has an incredible 100-year history as the original producer of whiskey. And thankfully, we are able to guarantee that all of our products you're able to get here in the UK are, as I say, distilled and aged and made overall in Japan.
Yes, I felt like that was a really good point that someone brought up. So yeah, really glad to talk about them. Thank you for explaining that. And I feel like, again, it's almost like you say, the structure of an industry that's almost become the victim of its own success, right? We're all loving Japanese whiskey right now. And then, we've got to find a way to get it to us.
Yeah, that's the thing. And as I say, it's a real pleasure that we still have access to this stuff. You said in 2008, it was relatively abundant to find Japanese whiskies if you went to the right bars. And now it might feel like there's an issue getting hold of them. But thankfully, you can actually still find some really good stuff in most shops and certainly in most good bars. Fantastic.
Now, loads of people have gone ahead and nosed and tasted, which is fantastic. I'm going to shout out some tasting notes, and I'm going to get you to talk us through this. So, Dan, getting fruit loaf on the nose. That's a really great shout, I think. L. Sutton, dried fruit, banana, apricot. Steve, common whiskey. I love a Japanese whiskey, and this one does not disappoint. Great stuff. Sean, beautiful nose, mandarin oranges, cherries, oak, and vanilla. Steve, again, salted licorice with strong floral scents. Definitely getting lots of florals coming through here. Mike, oak and umami nose. Interesting one. Kevin Wright, Reverend Kevin Wright, I believe, is getting a full broad wood resin. That's tricky to say. Very rich. David's getting strawberries and dried fruits with coconut. Pesce saying it's not as sweet as the blended grain. I mean, 100%. This is a single malt right here, so you'd kind of expect that. Mike getting the dried fruits now, plum and raisin. And Michael's got some great notes here. So harness, rice pudding, oak spice, fruity jam, malty biscuits, light apple peel. This is promising. Over to you, James. Talk us through the Stram.
Thank you. So one of the really interesting things about Japanese whiskey that's a little bit different to Scottish whiskey is their approach to creating single malts, because in Japan, you have a very different history to what we have in Scotland. So in Scotland, you've got hundreds of distilleries, all producing huge varieties of flavor profiles. And what we see in the world of blended whiskey, for the most part, is that you have these independent blenders who are buying bottles or barrels from all these different distilleries and able to bring them together into these incredible products. You talked about hedonism earlier on, but you have countless other incredibly famous and well-loved brands. In Japan, it's very different. You only really, for many, many years, had two major producers of whiskey in Japan, up to maybe 5 at various different points within its history. And those producers weren't necessarily as keen on the idea of trading their whiskies between one another. And as a consequence, you had way fewer different locations to choose these different barrels to create your blends and to create your products with. And so Suntory pioneered a concept called Tsukurawaki, which is a very difficult word. I'm not going to expect anybody to remember.
Say it again. Tsukurawaki.
Yeah, Tsukurawaki. So I might be pronouncing that wrong. My Japanese isn't as good as I would hope it to be. But it's about Tsukuriwake, and Tsukurawaki means variety in production. So because we have only 3 distilleries, 2 single malt distilleries, Yamazaki in the central region of Japan and Hakushu up in the north, and then Chita, our grain whiskey, kind of like the hedonism you guys tried earlier. So we have these 3 distilleries, and because we want to create as complex, or ideally more complex whiskies than the Scottish producers, we have to try and find ways of creating more variety of flavor from each one of those 3 different distilleries. So we have a huge variety of different shapes of pot stills. We have different ways of fermenting our whiskies, different peat levels in each of our distilleries, several different types of cask, up to 6 varieties of cask. And as a consequence of all of these different variables in the process of creating this whiskey, each of those variables impacts the flavor in different ways. So we can produce a really incredible, vast variety of styles in every one of our distilleries. So what we're trying today, the Distillers Select, this is basically a whiskey that brings together a variety of different ages, but also a variety of different cask styles, a variety of different pot still shapes, a variety of different peating levels, fermentation styles. And so you get this incredibly complex, layered style of whiskey that provides all those incredible tasting notes that you just read out.
I think it's amazing. Okay, I have to have a taste in a minute. The nose is extraordinary to me, though. I'm getting kind of pretty much what everyone said, a lot of strawberry all of a sudden, but there's a darkness to it, though, a bit of dark chocolate, there's some spice going on. It really is pretty complex.
Yeah, and it's really great that you've pulled out those particular tasting notes, because it's funny, people always think they have to be an expert to provide tasting notes, and you have to hold your glass in a particular way. If you trust your instincts, you're probably going to get it right. And all those things that you've just listed from the people watching, they're actually dead on what us as a company, Suntory, says is in the whiskey. So the strawberry you referred to, I talked about lots of different casks. We've been very lucky to experiment with a huge variety of casks at Yamazaki. And one of our favorites, particularly for younger styles of whiskey, is a red wine cask from Bordeaux in France. And those red wine casks provide incredibly juicy, fruity aromas. So I would definitely say in this, from those red wine casks, you get those beautiful strawberries, as well as creamy notes as well. So the people that talk about rice pudding and similar flavors, that comes from the particular bacteria in that Bordeaux cask. So well done on that strawberry and cream note.
Fantastic. Right, I'm going to have a sip. And then we have an amazing question from Lee. So I'm going to have a little sip because I can't resist any longer. And then I'm going to ask you the big question. So cheers. Cheers. It's so smooth. The texture's amazing. So good. Okay, the big question. And I'm really glad that Lee's asked this, actually. And this is brilliant. And I reckon a lot of other people are sort of feeling like this, especially whiskey. Lee says, I'm new to this and struggling to articulate what I'm tasting. How do you differentiate between spice/pepper and alcohol? And I feel like that's a really interesting thing to talk about. So I don't know, how did you get into tasting and how do you start to pick out different notes? Yeah, so it's genuinely a fantastic question. I think it's probably one of the things that a lot of people struggle with the most when they start tasting spirits, but particularly whiskey, because
the two flavors you've described, the flavor of alcohol and the flavor of spice, one comes from, you know, poorly made or poorly distilled ethanol that is natural in every spirit you ever get, because no matter what happens, you're always going to get some of those elements that literally just are what the flavor of ethanol is, which is a quite heavy flavor. But if it's poorly distilled, you get a lot more of that. So when you taste a really poor quality spirit, it tastes a lot of those quite harsh flavors. When you get to good quality spirits like what we're tasting today, and like what you tasted earlier with the grain whiskey, they're much lighter in terms of that more heavy, quite oily note that you get from ethanol. The spice, though, comes from oak, which we find in whiskey a lot. And when you have a whiskey that's quite delicate and quite clean in the style that Yamazaki is, naturally you're going to find that the flavor of the alcohol, even if it's made really well, does have some very delicate presence. And then you find those resinous notes that people described earlier from the oak that we really get in this special type of Japanese oak called Mizunara. Sometimes you can find those things confusing, but an easy way to kind of get over that and find a way to work out and discern, am I tasting alcohol or am I tasting really complex spices, is to do something that's kind of weird at first. So you're going to take a sip and you're going to hold it in your mouth for about 10 seconds. So we're
going to do this. Right, I'm ready. So we're holding it for 10 seconds.
10 seconds, because
10 seconds,
the first 5 seconds or so is just going to be your palate adjusting to the whiskey. And if after those 5 seconds, it turns to unpleasant flavors, what you're tasting is the alcohol, is the ethanol. But if what that turns to is fruits and spices and all the other aromatics that people are describing, then what you're tasting is the actual flavor of the whiskey. So let's all enjoy.
I like it. This is a good experiment. Okay, cheers. We're doing it. 10 seconds.
So I've just swallowed mine, and it's around 10 seconds now. So hopefully what you noticed is the flavor initially, you do get that kind of, you do taste alcohol. It is a 43% spirit at the end of the day. We'll find that with almost anything. But I found much quicker than 5 seconds, only 1 or 2 seconds later, it started to become much rounder and you start to taste this real intense fruity flavor. And we're lucky that Yamazaki is in this incredibly temperate climate in the center of Japan. And you see these really warm, humid summers. I was out there last in kind of May time, and it was already 33 degrees C. And this is an incredibly warm temperature for anyone that's ever lived in Scotland. Christiana, I mean, I know you've been to Scotland a bunch of times. Have you ever been in 33-degree heat ever in Scotland?
Certainly not in Scotland, although I have got sunburn a couple of times at the Isla Festival, but that's a whole nother story for a different day. But yeah, 33 degrees is extremely unusual for Scotland.
Exactly. I mean, I think the sunburn is what happens when you have a few too many drams of whiskey and you forget to put any lotion on.
Exactly. You're having too much of a great time outside in your 20-degree heat.
Exactly. But then it also gets really cold in Japan as well. So you have this huge temperature fluctuation. And as a consequence, you get these lovely tropical fruit flavors. So some people find that to be pineapple. That's what I find. Others find it to be more peachy. So that's that flavor that first comes through. And then you start to get the oak. That's where those spices start to come in. And this is where that discernment of the flavor, working out, is this a poorer quality alcohol that just tastes harsh and chemical and unpleasant? Or is this a spirit that's got real complexity and delicacy to it? And the spices that we get in this, yes, we get those red kind of fruits, the strawberries and creams that you described from that lovely Bordeaux cask. But you also get vanillas and gentle kind of baking spices from bourbon casks and really oily, resinous kind of sandalwood, cedarwood, incense-like aromas, which is from a very special type of wood that we only use from Japan, which is called Mizunara. And Suntory accounts for around 95% of the global use of this. And it's quite a unique thing that we're actually very lucky to be able to taste in such an affordable dram as this.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it is absolutely, you're right, a treat. And I think everyone's enjoying it as well. So Mike, oh, that's very good. Very sherry rich, all the dried fruits, Christmas pudding with brandy, maybe even brandy butter. Kevin Wright again, cumin, ground coriander, some of those spices. Peter Gould, summer fruit blossom comes through on the nose, in addition to strawberry raspberry. Your Uncle Vanya, love this. Can't stop chewing on it. We've got Malcolm Tucker. On the tongue, I get light fruit cake, sweetness, and into clove, pepper spice. Finish is a little bit shorter. Getting more of the woodiness in the taste, cinnamon, darker fruits for sure from Rob. There's so many tasting notes. I'm struggling to keep up. Lee, wow, I've started something now. Thank you for the insight. Really interesting. I'm so glad, Lee. I'm glad the 10-second trick helped. And on that, for me, what I find nosing and tasting is kind of like a comparison. So like if you nose even between the hedonism and the Yamazaki, like you can gradually pick out differences. And this is not to compare them for one being better or worse. It's to appreciate their differences. And I think actually with something like a blended grain and this, it's quite easy, quite quickly to pick out. You might not be able to articulate it, but you're like, this feels lighter. This feels more resinous. These kind of words, which is really fun, I think.
Exactly that. It's really interesting that it was a blended grain whiskey as well, because you get those different layers of flavor, which is exactly what you find in a Japanese whiskey, because of that super wacky thing that's so complex, is you get all these different styles and they're just harmonized. The Japanese, I described earlier that Shinjiro Tori wanted to create this style for the Japanese palate, and he did this huge research thing. And there's 3 kind of key words that we use to describe the flavor that people love in Japan. Those are delicate, complex, and balanced. So when you try a Japanese whiskey, just think about those 3 things. Is this delicate? Is this complex? I think with all those tasting notes, we can all agree that it's complex. Is it balanced?
Definitely. It's fabulous. And this has been such a treat to taste it. There are so many more tasting notes coming through, but I'm aware it's almost 8:15 and we've still got a whole nother dram to taste. But James, will you hang around for a bit and join us again towards the end of the tasting?
Absolutely. I'll see. I'm going to enjoy this in the meantime.
Amazing. Please do, because we've got even more comments coming through. And just before you sign off, Michael, James, you've converted me. This is the first Japanese whiskey I've really enjoyed. Sweet on the nose and the start of the palate moves to more savory notes. The finish is fruit and salinity. So you've made Michael into a Japanese whiskey fan. So this is awesome.
Fantastic. I think we will all find a Japanese whiskey to fall in love with one of these days. And I'm glad you have tonight.
Yes, fabulous. So if you've got any more questions or comments for James, keep them coming in and we'll come back to him. But for now, I'm going to bring Andy back. Hello. Andy, what did you make of the Yamazaki?
I love it. Amazing.
Oh, James is off.
I have to say as well, I mean, it must be the first time we've had a 10-second silence on a pour and sip live tasting before.
It's the first time I've been quiet in my life for 10 seconds, I think. I mean, I wasn't quite sure what to do.
Yeah. No, it's lovely. Really dark fruits. I loved it. Wonderful, wonderful.
It was awesome. And thank you so much to James. I'm glad he's hanging around. So again, any other comments or questions for him, keep them coming in. We're going to move on to the Benromach, but yeah, keep them up your sleeves or pop them in the comments and we will get James back after this just to chill and chat some more whiskey, because why wouldn't we?
Yes. Well, let's pour ourselves the Benromach first.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
A little bit of time to breathe. So we're finishing off tonight with a peaty one. These are the ones that usually kind of split opinion between everybody. But this one's a bit more unique. And I think we also had probably the first box that we ever did back in September last year was a Speyside peated whiskey. It was the Balvenie Week of Peat.
You're correct.
So we do often.
Good memory.
I remember I've got a list, in a Microsoft Excel document with all the pour and sip drams. I haven't really, but I probably should. And maybe someone has. I think
oh my gosh, if that is you, let us know, because you're a more organised human than me and I want to follow it.
But I do remember it. And so we usually we recognise peated whiskey with Islay. This one's a bit different because we're talking about a Speyside whiskey. Now, Benromach is a really small distillery. It produces about 150,000 litres of alcohol a year, so it's super, super small. Some big distilleries will literally do that in 2 days. It was founded in 1898, and it's literally the smallest distillery in Speyside. It's not the smallest distillery in Scotland. I think that's Edradour, which is another one of my favourite distilleries. But it's been mothballed about four or five times. But in 1993, Gordon and MacPhail bought it, and we know Gordon and MacPhail as being another great independent bottler. And it's been a labour of love for them ever since. And they started production in 1997, and they refitted the distillery totally. And what they're doing is it's really old school Speyside style. So they've refitted it in a really, really kind of old school way, harking back to the days of the 19th century of what it was like in Speyside. There's no computer monitoring. There's no kind of monitor gauges to kind of work things out. This is 2 distillers who work on site, and everything is done by senses and taste and experience. So that's really, really cool. There's some other distilleries a bit like that in Scotland. Someone like Springbank, for example, still really, really kind of family run and all kind of old school technology, no kind of modern technology. Now, we often think of Speyside nowadays as being this kind of very fruity, honeyed, sweet style whiskey. But back in the day, in the 19th century, it wasn't always like that. And actually, lightly peated kind of Speyside whiskies were kind of the norm. So it was actually very common in the 19th century to use some peat to kind of stoke the fires and to the malted barley. Now, Benromach itself actually produces a Speyside whiskey, harking back to those old days, which is very, very lightly peated. This one we're about to try is not a lightly peated one. This is peated to like 67 ppm, phenolic parts per million.
It's definitely got some smoke going on, definitely.
Just to kind of put that into context for anybody, if you've tried, let's say, Ardbeg, that's peated to 55 ppm. And we all know how very peated Ardbeg is, being one of the most peated. Lefroy's at about 40 or something like that. I think the most would be something like a Bruichladdich Octomore, which is something like 100. I've got one here, it's about 160 ppm. But you can get kind of caught up in ppm. It doesn't mean too much, apart from, you know, quite how it doesn't always work out. Sometimes I find like something that's peated to less ppm can really taste quite a lot more peated than something really, really high on the ppm. The big difference here to note is that while it doesn't specify where the peat has come from, we might be able to do some of that detective work that you were talking about, Christy, because there are two very different styles of peat. And while we always think about Islay peat, the Islay peat has lots and lots of notes of maritime salinity, iodine, and it's very, very different due to its kind of geographical location being by the sea and being windswept and having all that kind of sea salt and the air and the sea breeze in the air, whereas kind of mainland peat is much more heathery and earthy because it comes very much closer to obviously trees and kind of woodland. So that's something we need to think about while they haven't specified where the peat has come from. Now, this is their most heavily peated Benromach, and like I said, they're very, very small distillery, and this is 46%. It's matured totally in first fill bourbon casks, so we can expect lots of those kind of vanilla notes to come through, and the fresh oak notes to come through. And also, I mean, it was distilled in 2009 and bottled in 2020, so we're looking at probably 11 years old being this whiskey is 11 years old. They don't say about chill filtering or added colouring, unfortunately, on this bottle, but we can have a dram anyway. So shall we give it a go?
Yes, please. And you know what? It's so interesting when you say about the detective stuff, because for me, on the nose, immediately it feels very earthy. Yes, there's a lot of smoke, but it's more of a bonfire smoke than the iodine smoke. So I think you're right to highlight this. Yes,
I'm not getting that kind of classic Islay iodine, and sometimes I get TCP note as well, very medicinal kinds of note that I'm not getting as much here. It's much more kind of earthy smoke, like you said, bonfire embers, and maybe a hint of like those smoked meats as well that you do also get with Islay peat. But yeah, let's see what you guys are thinking. I mean, we've not tried it yet. I've barely just got a chance to nose it yet.
Oh my gosh, my nose has been in this dram for the last 5 minutes and I'm loving it. But yeah, let's see what everyone else thinks.
Yes, so like Sean McCarrick saying, this is very different peat to the Islay, much milder. Like I said, this is peated to like 67 ppm, so it's right up there with the Islay whiskies, the kind of the big hitters like your Ardbegs, which are more than Lagavulin and Lefroy, who kind of think of around the 35-40 mark. But it's more, I think, the style of peat that is what you're detecting, is this earthier note, the bonfire embers, not this kind of very, very kind of salty maritime salinity iodine note that you get with Islay that is quite so, you know, distinctive, let's say. So Jeff is saying he might need a knife and fork with this one. Mike Pizarro saying winter bonfire on a chamomile lawn. Jeff again saying I love this, best tonight. Sean McCarrick, damp earthy smell and some citrus in the background. The earthy smell, like you were saying, Chrissy, that's the real kind of giveaway that this is probably mainland peat rather than Islay peat. Now, Malcolm Tucker saying light smoke with honey, walking through wet leaves. Absolutely, it's kind of got that damp, mossy kind of feel if you're walking around where the trees are and kind of the leaves are kind of wet and the mud. Absolutely got all of that. Rob Bester, very light in colour. Hurray for Peat. Hooray for Peat. Sorry.
I mean, and bring on the peat too, but yes, hooray.
Bring on the peat, yeah, exactly. Steve Coleman Williams, smoke pushed through with a hint of vanilla. The vanilla definitely will be coming from those beautiful first fill bourbon casks that I think are from Heaven Hill Distillery.
Good shout.
Yeah, Sean McCarrick saying different to Islay peat. Steve Coleman Williams, good for today. Exactly. So while the hedonism felt a bit too summery on this cold, wet, miserable day, This one for Steve Coleman Williams, good for today, a colder, wet summer's day. Don't want too heavy, but some substance. Dan S, perfect whiskey for a night like this. It's exactly it. This is a real fireplace. You've got in, it's been soaking wet, just like James was on his journey home.
Yeah, poor James.
Literally rushed home for this, soaking wet, just put his, his new stuff on, and this is the dram. Ian Thompson, not as harsh a peaty taste as either, so I'm guessing mainland peat. Whereas you see after a little breathing, it becomes a sweet nectar-like after a while. Wow, there's loads of this. I mean, the peaty ones always really do kind of get everyone's juices flowing. And lastly, Steve Hickson, certainly not one that I appreciate. Trying with an ice cube. Definite smoked bonfire aftertaste. David Stanton, orange peel, and a splash of apple and smoky peat. Yeah, a lot of people will not like this one because it's probably the most, not controversial, but it's going to split opinion because peat is such a unique flavour and it really isn't for everyone. The one thing I have learned on Pour and Sip is whenever I've thought that there's going to be a dram like the Lefroy 10 car strength, for example, that will make everyone go, oh God, no, I hate this. I've been so surprised that pretty much everyone's loved it so via the tasting notes.
And you know what? If peat isn't your thing, that is totally fine. As we've already experienced, there are so many whiskies out there that are not peated and are also delicious. Two of my favourite styles of whiskey is grain whiskey and heavily peated whiskey. So I'm in my element right now.
What a night! What a night for Christy!
What a night for me! It's like an unofficial Christy day of Pour and Sip. I'm very happy about this. But if these styles aren't for you, that's also fine. There will be whiskies there for you. But what I would encourage you to do is give it a go. Check these out. You never know, you might surprise yourself.
Yeah, just gonna read a couple more. The Cask Lad is saying there's an oily paint smell that I'm getting. Absolutely. Peter Gould, lots of smoke leading to a fruity jammy note with a touch of vanilla on the nose. Very different. Liam Arrowsmith, not usually a fan of peaty whiskies and nervous to try this one with it being heavily peated, but very surprised it's actually a very nice dram. Exactly, that's what I was saying. I'm always usually surprised by how many people convert it. And
I can't wait any longer, Andy. I've got to have a taste.
Yeah, sorry.
Got to have a taste. Cheers to you and cheers to everyone as well. Let's see what it's like. Mmm. That is glorious. Big old swoosh of peat going on there, but I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's thinner. It's quite thin, but not in a bad way. It's really. Yeah. There's lots and lots of like kind of light blossom honey sweetness there. It's not kind of dark, and like I said, this is bourbon cask. There's no sherry in here, so we're getting lots of kind of more vanilla notes, and there's lots of that kind of oak from the cask, like kind of wood spice there that's towards the finish. The peat is very, very dominant, but it's I don't know, it's quite a sweet peat.
Yeah.
There's this kind of lovely kind of smoky sweet note that's going on.
Oh, got dramas here. Wasn't me breaking a glass.
Nothing to do with Christy. No one was hurt.
Nothing to do with me.
No one was hurt in the making of this Pour and Sip live tasting.
Yeah.
So what about you, Christy? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking it's really wonderful, and yeah, I know what you mean about the sweetness. It's really reminding me of kind of like florals in a strange way, like not rose, but maybe along the lines of like magnolia. Something a bit sort of lighter on the floral side, which is really interesting with the heavy smoke. And sometimes I think you've got to sit with it for a while to get through the smoke. It's like Lefroy. The first time that I tasted Lefroy, all I could think of was bonfire on the beach. But after a while, you get the orange come through. And yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think the sweetness really kind of like opens up that peat quite easily. And there's a real kind of elegant complexity to it, which I'm enjoying.
Elegant's a really good word. It's not like a blow your face off peat, like kind of that is so dominant that the kind of sweeter notes underneath kind of get a bit lost. I can also kind of notes of apricot jam and strawberry, maybe really kind of wonderful fruity notes that are underneath there. It's super complex, this one. I have to say, it really is. Mike Pizarro saying, wow, I love my Killoman and Mahir Bay car strength, which again we had in Pour and Sip, but this is totally different. Sweetness to it, nothing like sherry. Exactly, there is no sherry. It's all first fill bourbon. So we probably won't get those kind of classic sherry cask notes, the kind of dried fruits, the Christmas cake kinds of things. We'll get much more of the bourbon cask, which is those vanilla notes that we were talking about. Maybe more like a light agave nectar, orange peel aftertaste. Yeah.
Wow, what a note.
There's definitely that kind of citrusy, kind of not bitter, but you know, it's there in the finish. Absolutely. Alistair Tapp had a bottle of 10-year-old Benromach previously that I didn't get on with, but this is all right. Yes. Malcolm Tucker, smoke from dying embers, got white chocolate again with the pepper from the wood on the finish. Peter Gould, this is the best one of the three for me. Michael Smith versus the Benromach 10. This is much more sophisticated, lots more to it too. More grown up, sweet and salty, fruity and salinity. Jonathan B, anyone getting a hint of lemon at the end? Absolutely. 100% getting lemon at the end. Ian Jambo Rain, this is really interesting. The sweetness comes first and it doesn't seem overly smoky, but then boom, in capital letters, the smoke suddenly comes in and hits you. Absolutely, definitely hits you. Chris Turner, it's a tie between hedonism and Yamazaki for me. Chris, you're well ahead of us. Well ahead of us.
Oh my gosh, it's time to, yeah, I mean, while you're having a think about which your favourite is, shall we bring James back for a little bit of chin wag? Let's see if James is back. I mean, honestly, like, what a trio of whiskies this evening. I feel thoroughly spoiled. Here he is. How are you doing, James?
Very well, thank you. Nice to be tasting along, although I don't have the Benromach, unfortunately, but that's just as good.
I'm really, really enjoying this. It's been a wonderful box. I think all three have been, but also super different that it's really impossible to kind of compare them, like a blended grain, which is beautiful, super sweet, the Yamazaki, the Japanese whiskey, and then this, which is a peat monster. So yeah, kind of hard to compare this one. So we are still going to ask you guys, because we love to ask you guys this question. Which was your favourite of tonight's boxes? But judging by your comments, I think all of you have been keen on all three of these. So it will be interesting to see which one. And James won't be offended if it's not the Yamazaki. He won't be offended. He doesn't mind.
I feel like this is one of the times that I'm genuinely really going to, I mean, I struggle all the time, but this is a real struggle for me because all three of them, I feel like are excellent examples in their category. And it's a bit like when you're judging spirits, which I'm so lucky to get to do sometimes. It's like, you don't have to rank them in that game. You can give them medals all round. I want to give them medals all round, please. I don't want to have to pick one.
Yeah, absolutely. James, what's your view? Are you a peated whiskey fan?
Yeah, so I know the other two drams really well. Thankfully, I've tasted them both a bunch of times, and peated whiskey generally is often one of my favourites. It's often for me between Japanese whiskey, which is often a lot lighter, or peated whiskies. So Benromach is a real special one for me, and to be fair, grains is also one of my favourites. So I'm super interested as well to see how this all comes out.
All three of us with three different stars from our favourite categories, all here tonight in the box.
We are spoiled. I just have to shout out to Dan S, who started it again, saying he's going to have to get some cheese in for next tasting. There are some cheese lovers in this group, and I feel like if you want to do a cheese and whiskey pairing, all three of these would have very different examples, and it would be a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this one and cheese, some kind of, I don't know, like a Stilton or something would be absolutely wonderful. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves again with our food pairing. So Rob Bester saying all the drams have been super different tonight. Love them for all different reasons, actually. Peter Gould saying the Benromach. Sean McCarrick, Benromach shading it from the Yami. James, have you ever heard it called a Yami before?
Yeah, I've called it a Yami in the past. Don't tell the bosses in Japan, but
I'm here. I've never heard that, but I'm going to adopt that.
Yeah,
Yami.
I mean, don't make it mainstream. I'll get in trouble then.
Well, anyway, everybody, James said that from now on we're going to all call it Yami. So
tell everyone, spread the word.
Simon, hedonism for me wins on the nose. I agree. Honestly, the nose of the hedonism is one of my favourite noses ever. So it really is up there. Ian Thompson, hedonism, Benromach equal best. Your Uncle Vanyo, wow, smell your Yamazaki glass now. Yes, often that when whiskey's been sitting, you finish it and you go back into the glass, you get this wonderful, and it kind of changes a bit the longer it's sat in there for as well. So Mr. Steve Ramsden, the Compass Box, Mikolai Simerman, Benromach, but hedonism lived up to the name. Guy CP, Yamazaki, it would be my first Japanese whiskey purchase. Suresh D, Yamazaki is my favourite. Pesha, Yamazaki, but all three were great drams. Charlie, hedonism. Malcolm Tucker, Benromach, but I love smoky whiskies. Wow, there's absolutely there's loads here. Chris, did you want to have a guess?
I don't think that we can call it. I mean, I'm really struggling to keep up. So, Michael, for me, this has been one of the best boxes, which I did not expect. 1 Benromach, 1.5 Yamazaki, 3rd Compass Box.
I like that.
Kaz, great username. Hedonism was the most different for me to what I'd normally have bought. Feel like it would be a good one to have in the cupboard to try and convert friends to whiskey. It's so sweet, drinkable. Yeah. Victor, Yamazaki all the way. Reverend Kevin Wright, all very close. Probably hedonism by a whisker. Owen, really, really difficult. All delightful in their own way, but the Benromach just edges it. Michael's on it again. Seriously, can we do a cheese and pour and sip night face to face, please? I mean, I think we're going to have to give the people what they want. Alistair, hedonism. I love grains, and that was up there. Steve Coleman, Yami was Yamahara motorbike. I mean, can't comment, don't know. I can't keep up. Mike, Benromach and Compass Box are so good and so different. Couldn't rank them, drawing them all first place. Back on the cheese, we've got Manchego thrown in the mix. Bernard loved them all. Got the hedonism Benromach. The jammy yammy, I love that. That's from Brizzy. Great shout. And here we, on and on and on. I don't know how we can call it, but Benromach with the Scottish cheddar is a great S07.
Lovely. That does sound wonderful. What about you, Chris?
Don't, Andy. I can't. I feel like this is really unfair to call it. Do you know what? I think for the day, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, this is not a single grain drinking day for me. The weather is not right. So I'm coming down probably towards the Yamazaki. However, I adore all three of them. And on any given day, I would fall in love with any of them.
I think you've come up with a very important point there as well about mood and weather and where you are drinking whiskey, because sometimes you can just be in the right moment, in the right place, on the right day, and just that whiskey speaks to you because of the environment, because of where you've been, and all of that kinds of stuff. So it is interesting that on a cold, wet night, I am heading more towards the Benromach Peat smoke, to be honest, because it just feels right tonight. Whereas, like you're saying, the hedonism has this wonderful summery vibe to it. So yeah, while all three were great in their categories, we've had an amazing Japanese whiskey, an amazing kind of peated non-Islay whiskey, and an incredible example of single grain whiskey. So
yeah, it's been awesome. I have to ask before we go, Jane, we're talking about the time and place of whiskey. What are some of your favourite places to drink whiskey? Where in Japan is the best place you've drunk whiskey?
Oh, it's such a tough one. I mean, there's something really special about being at the distilleries. So I've been super lucky to visit about 9 or 10 of the various different Japanese distilleries over the years. And each one of them has incredibly special places where you can sit and enjoy a dram. But in terms of a bar, I was really lucky to do an apprenticeship at one of the most well-known bars in Tokyo, which is a place called Bar High Five. And I've been back there countless times since. And it's just a perfectly typical example of what truly special Japanese hospitality is about. They've got this tiny little bar, which is super traditional in Tokyo, and they've chopped down a famous Japanese oak tree, that same Mizunara we've talked about, and they've just sliced it in half, and that forms the bar as half the entire trunk of this oak tree, and then all the other half has been split out into a few tables. So you just sit there. They've got 200 or so Japanese whiskies, and you get served by people that give you this really authentic experience of being in one of the most amazing cultures of drinking. So I definitely recommend heading over to Bar High Five. It's one of the most special places, and there's others out there. I can definitely call out a few if anyone's interested. Message me on social media or something. I can tell you more places to go. But either head to a distillery or head to Bar High Five in Tokyo.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait. Japan is like top of my travel bucket list right now. I'm going there as soon as I can.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
My favourite place I've ever been. Like, I'm obsessed with Japanese culture, not just whiskey. I love anime and all of this kind of stuff. So going there was incredible. Tokyo, maybe the best. It's just probably the best place I've ever been. It's just totally mental, like just totally mental, but in the best way possible. And such an amazing culture shock, and they're just such incredibly friendly people and so respectful. Like, it's just, for an English person going over there, the level of respect is just like nothing you've witnessed before, and it's amazing. But yeah, I drank lots of amazing whiskey over in Japan. I can't remember the bars I went to be honest with you, and I should have visited a distillery there. I didn't even think about it. I was like, didn't have it on the time. But yeah, anyway, amazing place, highly recommend. However, if you want to go to a bar in London that also has an awesome tree trunk that's kind of got whiskey out of the tap, Black Rock in London.
Yes, Black Rock. Go check it out.
And they've got loads of great Japanese whiskey there, so highly recommend that as well.
And to be honest, it makes me so sad to round off the evening, but it's been incredible. There's been 3 amazing whiskies. Thank you, James, for coming to join us. It's been wonderful to catch up and have a chat. I hope you're feeling like dried off now after your rainstorm encounter.
I mean, I've had a glass of whiskey and I've had a good conversation. I'm feeling like I've actually arrived at home now, which is quite nice after the journey back.
I'm glad. I'm so glad. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you for your comments and questions. It's been a joy to taste whiskey with you again. Andy, what are we going to do? Like, we've got 2 weeks to the next one. How are we going to cope?
Well, at least it's not 3 weeks this time. So let's look on the positive side of this.
That's true. Amazing. So as usual, we'll be back on the 3rd Thursday. I'll say that right. So I think that's the 19th. The 19th, I believe. Let me just check my calendar. Yes. We'll be back then to taste the remaining 2, if you can resist.
Try and save your drams for that.
Amazing. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a joy, as always. Keep safe. Keep enjoying your drams. Keep in touch with us in between times as well at Pour and Sip on social. And we'll catch up with you soon.